Hello again guys, welcome back to the channel. Today is part 2 of our Microsoft Flight Simulator default A320 test flights. If you remember in the last video we were at the holding point for runway 23 left in Manchester, and in today's video we're going to pick up there, carry out the takeoff and the cruise portion of the flight up to Edinburgh. I do hope you enjoy the video. If you do, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel, and if you have any comments or questions for me, please leave them down in the comment section below. Thanks very much, and I hope you enjoy the flight. Okay, so just as a reminder, we are at the holding point for runway 23 left. Everything's ready to go, we just need to call air traffic control for the takeoff clearance. Probably just worth mentioning, I did have multiple crashes whilst trying to reload this flight, and actually I had to restart it from the apron. So if anything is slightly different from where we left off, then that's why. I did just change the fuel load as well to give us a more realistic fuel load, so we've now got just under 6.5 tonnes of fuel. So it's clear on the approach. Strobe lights can go on. Lane lights on. I'm quite looking forward to this part of the flight. I've seen very mixed results of how this thing flies in the sim. I'm not really sure how much of that is the aircraft and how much of it is user error, but we'll fly the departure exactly as we would in the real aircraft, using all the same control inputs, and we'll see what the response is. So we'll set 50% N1, wait for the engines to spool up. Take off. Manflex 30, SRS runway, auto thrust blue. Thrust is set, 100 knots. It's V1, rotate. And the aircraft needing a lot more backstick than the real thing to get the nose up. It's positive climb, gear up, and we'll just follow the flight directives. Lever climb, thrust climb. And we should now see out blue. Again, really large.
123, please acknowledge.
Really large control inputs needed to actually make the aircraft behave as you'd expect. It seems to be much less sensitive than the real aircraft. Much larger control inputs needed, and it does seem to auto trim, but it seems very slow to do so. Okay, flaps at 0. We won't bother with the default air traffic anymore. I've tried doing some other flights with them, and it's a bit of a disaster really. They often don't, when you try and talk to them, there's no voice in the response, so you don't hear them respond to you, and then you miss it, and then eventually they terminate your air traffic service, so it just doesn't work very well. I'll talk more about that in a minute, but that's the thing I'm least impressed with in the simulator so far. Anyway, we'll level off here at 5,000 initially. Aircraft doing a reasonable job of maintaining the speed and the track. Flight directors seem to work pretty well. The weather radar is painting the weather, albeit I think quite aggressively painting. I think in reality, climb. I think in reality, should say out. I think in reality what you'd see on the screen right now would be much more just green and maybe a little bit of yellow rather than red and magenta. We'll just come around the corner and then we'll put the autopilot in. Just lost a tiny bit of height there. I was following the flight directives reasonably accurately, but it's probably just my flying. Okay, we'll pop the autopilot in now. That's Alt, Star, Nav, Autopilot 1. And we'll climb straight up to flight level 310. Do an open climb actually. So that's open climb, should say out blue, and it should say 310. Don't know why it's showing 280 there. I did try and do this flight a minute ago, and unfortunately the sim crashed. But I did notice the autopilot behaviour is pretty strange in this thing. It's a shame because the systems are half decent. Just before we discuss anything more, so the flaps are up. Runway turn off lights, and those will light can come off. Disarm the spoilers. After takeoff checklist. Landing gear up, flaps retracted, and the packs are on. That's the after takeoff checklist complete. We'll turn the weather radar off as well. It's really just hampering us from viewing the screen, unless we actually can turn it down. No. So that doesn't quite work as it should either. There's 10,000 feet, landing lights off, and the aircraft is accelerating up to cruise speed as it should. So as I was saying, the systems are actually pretty decent for a default aircraft. There are a lot of in-op systems, but yeah, certainly to be forgiven on a default aircraft, and the systems are functional enough that you can operate the aircraft fairly close to the real thing. Obviously visually it's a really lovely model, it's pretty stunning actually. The flight model itself, it's a bit iffy to be honest. I mean it's usable, but it doesn't handle anything like the real Airbus. But the major thing that lets us all down is the autopilot really. It's pretty far removed from the real thing. It does some quite strange things at times. Some of that may be me misclicking because the click spots are pretty fiddly, but this thing just doesn't operate as you'd expect, unfortunately. Anyway, we'll climb up to 310 if the aircraft lets us, and then we'll set up for the approach into Edinburgh. Performance wise as well, this thing does seem slightly overpowered. We're currently doing 4,000 feet a minute. Realistically, probably expecting closer to 2,000 feet a minute. It's coming back now to 3.5. It's not completely accurate, but it's reasonable enough. The area in which this sim really shines though is the weather. I'm so impressed with the weather implementation. It looks absolutely stunning. The real world weather, it still needs a little bit of work. I did a flight earlier, and I know that the weather conditions at the time there were actually thunderstorms outside. And in the sim it was clear skies, so it's not perfect, but the visualizations are just absolutely beautiful. Just coming up on 20,000 feet now. There is still a little bit of weather ahead of us, so we'd probably leave the seatbelt signs on just for now. And in the sim we have to anyway, they're unfortunately in-op. Things like that I don't really understand why. I mean, they had seatbelt signs in FSX, and the only function that's going to change in the cockpit is the message on the EWD, which is gone now anyway, so it seems a bit silly not to have functioning seatbelts, but anyway. The progress page doesn't work, unfortunately. There's no cruise, optimum or rec max altitudes. And the flight plan, we'll keep an eye on it, but I noticed on the previous attempt at this flight that it wasn't really updating and keeping accurate, which is unfortunate because you do need an accurate distance, whether it's on the flight plan or at least in the progress page, to properly manage your descent. The descent management in this thing, if you leave it all managed with the autopilot, is pretty poor. It doesn't really do a very good job. So it'd be nice to at least have an accurate flight plan distance to allow you to manage the descent yourself. Once again, I don't know why it's only going to climb up to flight level 280. We'll climb up to 280 and then try and see if we can select open climb again to get it up to 3.1. It's a short sector anyway though, so it doesn't really matter. As I said, as soon as we get to the top of the climb, we'll start setting up for the approach into Edinburgh. No airports displaying on the ND for some reason, even though I've got it selected. And I know it does work because I've seen it on the again on the previous attempt at this flight, so not quite sure what's going on there. One to go. And again, I sound like I'm being very negative, and as a sim overall, I'm really not. The Outstar, Asobo and Microsoft, they've done an awesome job with the sim. The default aircraft, you know, they're perfectly acceptable for default aircraft, and all the GA stuff I've tried I was very happy with. It's just that with the airliners obviously having more complex systems, particularly the autopilot, you really notice the downfalls there. So it's gone into Outstar. Let's try pulling again for an open climb. There we go. Open climb, out blue, flight level 310. Don't know why that didn't work previously, but there you go, the airports have just popped in. Not sure what that's all about. What have we got close by? So we've got Carlisle, about 40 miles to the north. That's Durham Tees Valley, about 40 miles off to the northeast. So there's Newcastle, and Leeds should be just down to the east, southeast of us. Speed, 1 to go. Probably be in Mach by now on the FMA, but yeah, maybe that's just something that doesn't quite function properly, and that's something you can totally live with. It's really not that important. Outstar, there are certain things on this aircraft that are missing, but they're not important, so that's fine. But then there are other things where it's so far removed from reality that it does become a hindrance, and not just a hindrance in terms of operating this aircraft like the real thing. It just becomes a hindrance in general to actually flying the aircraft. Anyway, just levelling off now in the cruise. We can't adjust the TCAS. We'll get set up now for the approach into Edinburgh. Unfortunately, I don't know what the weather in Edinburgh is doing currently, but again on the previous flight he gave us the ILS 06, so we'll set that up now. There's our cruise. And again we'll go via Tala. Again the distance just doesn't seem to function properly. I'll try again. I did try on the last flight. If I go direct to Tala, that should update the flight plan distance. So that's direct Tala. And as you can see, it unfortunately doesn't update the distance, so that does make things quite a bit trickier. So we're currently at 31,000 feet. We need 124 miles for the descent. We're already at less than 100, so we'll actually start descending straight away. Come down to 6,000 feet initially for the arrival. And we'll go open descent as we're quite high. Again, that should be open descent, not descent, but we'll leave it to do its thing. Hopefully it will start descending in a second. So the ILS 06 Edinburgh we have in the box. RadNav, ILS 06 108.9, that's correct. Performance. Unfortunately I don't know what the weather is, as I said. We'll put in the QNH that we had out of Manchester. At least that's something. And the MDA is 310. And again, we can't put anything in the progress page, so we can't unfortunately get a good idea of the distance for the descent. As you can see now, it's showing 316 miles, which is completely wrong, so yeah, it's really broken unfortunately. Go auto brake low. It's not working. Medium? No. For some reason the auto brake doesn't work. Anyway, for the approach into Edinburgh, it's the ILS 06, it's plate 50-1, ILS 108.9, final approach track 062, aerodrome elevation 136 feet. There's profile check at 12 DME of 4,000 feet, down to an MDA of 310, and there is approach climb on runway heading to 3,000 feet. Terrain, there is some high terrain around Edinburgh, particularly out to the southeast. MSA is 3,900 feet. Weather, as I said, we can't unfortunately get the ATIS just yet. I would use auto brake low for the landing, but again, it doesn't seem to work. Oh, it's working now. Not sure why that wasn't working before. So auto brake low, we'll use idle reverse. So we need about 100 miles now for the descent. We've only got about 70. So we'll just take some speed brake to help with the descent. Go with half speed brake for now. The descent rate seems somewhat reasonable. It's kind of maybe a little bit aggressive, but broadly what you'd expect with... Okay, that's probably a bit much now. Spoke too soon. But the descent rate without the speed brake was fairly reasonable. So what we'll do, we'll stop the video here. And we'll come back for part 3. We'll finish off the descent and the arrival into Edinburgh. So there you go guys, we're now in the descent. We'll come back in part 3 of the series for the arrival and landing into Edinburgh. Once again, I do hope you enjoyed the video, and again if you did, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. And if you have any comments or questions for me, please leave them down in the comment section below. Thanks very much, and I'll see you all again soon.